conversation to ask a different kind of question. When technology looks at us, what does it really see? Have you thought about technology in this light? Like, what does technology see in human beings? And what happens when those systems start making assumptions, especially about gender? Have you all had that where you'll do a search on AI, on Google, anything? If you just ask a simple thing, a picture of a leader, what shows up? It's a man's picture usually, it's never a woman. So, introducing our first speaker, a facilitator at heart, who makes workshops energizing and inclusive, co founder of Fail Forward conferences, championing conversations on failure and psychological safety, 15 plus years across software, product, and agile leadership, heads the external DEI data team at Springer Nature, a speaker who brings clarity to topics like facilitation, DEI, allyship, and researcher diversity. Please welcome Rucha Ramachandra. Okay, she's getting ready. And our next speaker, founding CEO of the Udaiti Foundation, dedicated to increasing women's workforce participation. She's also the recipient of the Women Transforming India Award. Wow. And a 3-time entrepreneur with a successful exit record. Former Adobe leader managing a billion-dollar business unit in the Bay Area and an angel investor and mentor for women-led businesses. Wow, 2 powerhouses together. Please welcome Pooja Sharma Goyal. Yeah, please clap for them. Small crowd doesn't mean we don't clap.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction.
30 minutes.
Good afternoon. That's much better. So this is a In Conversation. I'm Rucha Kapre and we're going to talk together with Pooja. But before we begin, I have a few questions for you. So wear your thinking hats and let's see where we go. It's very, very likely that you might have seen these questions in the past 2 days. I would be very surprised if you haven't. Can we please bring up the questions? So I'm just going to stand quickly to read this out. What is the percentage of women and non-binary STEM graduates worldwide? A quick show of hands if you think it is 55%. Okay, that's ambitious. A quick show of hands if you think it is 45%. Okay. You have some bookmarks to be won if you answer it right. I forgot mentioning that. And a quick show of hands now if you think it's 35%. Okay, we have a very good reality check here. That's correct. It's 35%. Feel free to grab your bookmarks later. The second question, so from a global view to a more local view, what is the percentage of women and non-binary STEM graduates in India? A show of hands if you think it's 50%. If you think it's 43%. Okay. And if you think it's 47%. Okay. Cool. So it is actually 43% according to a report. Please feel free to grab your bookmarks. And again, gender gap is not just across geographies, it is also within disciplines. So there are no questions here, but very, very quickly going through this. If you look at subjects like computer science or if you look at subjects like physics, the representation is very, very low of women and other gender. And if you look at literature, education, teaching, the representation is very, very high. Now, why am I talking about this and what does this have to do with this session? Well, I come from a research background and why I'm talking about this is research and our day-to-day lives are not separate. You know, the vaccines we take, the technology we use, everything is being researched and it culminates into our day-to-day life sooner or later. So you can't really separate these two aspects, right? And now imagine a world where this research is done only by specific people, maybe in the west of the world, or it is done by only specific genders, or say if it is only done by specific ethnicities, or in an Indian context, say it is only done by certain castes, traditionally somebody who's like really a very, very higher caste only has access to education. Imagine what kind of a daunting world we would be living in. And hence, having these numbers is really very, very important. We know that it is a problem, the representation, but we really don't know how big this problem is. And that's where I think data comes into picture. So my question to you, Pooja, is you have been advising governments and industry leaders on how to improve women's participation as well. Because we spoke about these numbers, but I intentionally didn't talk about how it's a leaky pipeline, right? Though it is 43% of graduates, when it actually comes to work, it's only 1 out of 3 women who joins the workforce. And then further, as you climb the ladder, it's leakier and leakier to a point where C-suite really represents really very few numbers. So my question here is, you're advising the government and industry leaders on how to improve women's participation in India's workforce. Why do these gaps still exist?
Thank you, Richa, and thank you to AnitaB.org for inviting us here. My daughter attended the Grace Hopper conference in Chicago last month, and she just came back with just so inspired about building things. She met so many phenomenal women leaders there. So really, I'm so thrilled that we are organizing this in India, and it's been amazing to meet some of the leaders here. Also, let me confess something. Rucha had to do a lot of the heavy lifting for this panel. So if this panel goes well, all the credit to Rucha. Now to the question, right? About why these gaps still exist. About the first decade and a half of my life, professional career, I was quite gender blind. I just assumed that, look, there is no one sitting there who's trying to discriminate against you just because you're a woman. It just doesn't make any rational sense, right? You want to grow your company, you want to grow your team, you want to grow your sector, you want to make sure that the right kind of talent actually matches with the right kind of opportunity. Why should gender come in the middle? Of course, I was in for a root shock. And in the last decade, as my daughters were growing up, as I was mentoring other entrepreneurs, leaders, what became clear was that there are biases, there are systemic challenges because of which the representation continues to be so low at different levels, right? And I think the aha moment for me was that there is not one person who's sitting there and saying, oh, I don't like women, and therefore I will pay you lesser than the man, right? And that's not the case. These gender norms that we talk about, or the biases that we talk about, are not only in our heads. They are embedded deeply in the workplaces we have designed. We have designed our workplaces keeping man as the standard, right? Their career trajectories as a standard. Not women's career trajectories, which differ from a man's. The infrastructure we have built, whether it is housing, urban spaces, transport, all of that, again, doesn't keep the needs of women in mind. That is why even today, we all struggle to find a woman's washroom in more than half the places, let alone shop floors and factories. It is embedded in the policies that have been designed in the country. As of today, there are 53 laws in the country that prohibit women from working in certain areas. These are policies that have been designed and they have continued to stay. For example, women cannot work in night shifts, or women cannot work in hazardous industries. And again, it's not because a policymaker was sitting there and saying, oh, I want to keep women in their homes, right? It was just because there were only men making the decisions. There was no voice of a different kind of a usage, a different kind of a person who might have needs there. And therefore, these gender norms, which are embedded in our design infrastructure policies, very hard to dismantle. And therefore, it is important for us to be talking about it today as the new infrastructure is being built. About 100 years ago, we were building the highways and the airports, and all of the physical infrastructure was being built. The buildings were being built. As we speak today, the digital infrastructure of the next, I don't know how many decades is being built, because it's moving so fast right now. So it is extremely important that as we build this digital infrastructure, the 50% of the human population is adequately represented there. And data forms the foundation of that. The previous speaker, Chandna, talked about it, data is essentially the baseline from where then we can begin to act and set goals and move forward. So data is the foundation of that, and I know, Rucha, you work a lot in the whole research publishing industry. So in fact, it would be great to understand from you how you think about data and why it is important to have that gender disaggregated data when in research publishing.
Sure, but before even I answer that, there's one term that I learned for the very first time when I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, and that was the term gender blind. And I so loved that term because it never occurred to me growing up the way I was being brought up, or when I studied, or even because I'm a computer science graduate, even in my classroom, it never occurred to me, right, that there's something off. It was not even the closest thought. Maybe even after entering the workforce, but then slowly the realization hit. And until that time, I was not even aware of something called as bias or a DEI program. After I started going to the boardrooms, I realized I'm the only person like myself, which is when it hit. And of course, I could see things around me, but maybe I was like, it's happening to me. But the more you talk to other people when you're growing up, the more you realize that it's a scenario that's very, very common. So if it is so common, how do you know how big of a problem it is? And that's exactly where data comes in. So how many of you use maps here? Very often, all of us, right? So for you to use a map, you need to know where you want to get, right? And you also need to know where you are right now. And that's exactly what data does. Because we know there's a problem, but nobody knows how big of a problem it is. And nobody knows where we are currently with the gender gap and where we want to reach with it. What data does, and it's a cliche, but it's so true that, in God we believe, and everyone else needs to bring data to the table. It is so true because only when you have data, you can take pragmatic decisions in terms of driving something forward. And that's exactly where the role of data comes in picture here. Now imagine we are talking about researchers. These researchers could be sitting anywhere in the world. They're not employed by anyone. They're not even employed by the organization I'm working with. Say, they might be sitting here somewhere. There might be a person who has written a book or a journal paper within you. So you are a researcher. They might be working in a hospital. They might be working in a university. So imagine if they're spread out across the world and it's millions of them, you cannot go to them and get their data. And they are also not going to come to your system every day. So in the lack of availability of this data, AI really came to our rescue, where we used algorithms to predict gender. The way it worked was you feed the algorithm with the first name, the last name, and it gave out a gender. But I'll also talk about, don't feel scary yet. It also gave you the accuracy. So if you fed the geography, the accuracy increased further. For example, Alex as a name in certain geographies might be a man or a woman. Similarly, Kiran, based on which region in India you're coming from, could be a man or a woman. And what the algorithm does is it predicts gender, but never on a one-to-one basis. So for example, if you feed the algorithm 100 records, it will tell you that 60% are men and 40% are women. So what it helps is faster baselines, which will help drive some decisions and at least start some initiatives around it. It also gives you accuracy and a confidence score, so you know how much to trust it. What the downside I feel of it is, it will never give you non-binary data because it is not self-reported. So it will either tell you whether somebody is a man or a woman. So with that, we were able to set and establish these baselines to at least start something in that direction. And I think it's very, very important to start with data, with the world in which we're living in, because it's only sensible to take data-driven decisions in certain directions. And with that, and since the scenario is changing around this, Pooja, my question to you is, why is this such a critical path issue? You know, in spite of us having this data, what are the issues that needs the governments and the policymakers and business leaders' attention, and what can we do about it?
That was such an amazing example, and kind of triggered a number of ideas and thoughts. If you zoom out a little bit, right, the landscape is shifting very fast as we speak. So just within the last 3 to 4 years, what is evident is AI has transitioned from just being a tool for analysis to now a tool for creation. You know, it started out for analysis like sorting, using it for spam filters, sorting emails, object recognition, photo recognition, to then moving to prediction. So a lot of the chatbots that we use are actually just predicting the next word based on the linkage with the previous word, right? Not just that, but it now has the capacity to even predict outcomes like a possibility or probability of equipment failure or probability of a customer churn. Then to understanding really complex issues. You can have very nuanced conversations with these chatbots now. And now finally, you are just seeing them become creators. They are creating AI, the AI tools now are creating text, images, videos, and that is what is mind-boggling, right? Which is that when then human bias meets machine learning bias, then it can grow exponentially and extremely fast. So therefore, it is extremely important that that women are not just using AI, which by the way in itself is a very interesting story, because until 1 year ago when I was speaking at Google last year and I was looking at the data, I saw that only 27% of the women were using AI compared to 80% of the men that were polled. And then this year, a few months ago, I read the data that gap has just completely narrowed. It's as many women using AI as men. So that's really amazing and mind-boggling that shift can happen in such a short period of time. But I think now the important part is to be on the creation side of things. so that as AI starts to play the role of the creator and as we run the risk of embedding these biases deeply, that there is a gendered perspective there, and we are able to reduce and mitigate that bias to the extent possible. And I know that I'd actually love to learn a lot more about your research, but if you could kind of crystallize some of the insights that you have gathered from doing research in that particular space, I think that would be really useful.
Absolutely. And very, very quickly, I really loved the point where you said we need to move from the consumer side to the producer side. And anyways, we say it's a consumer economy, right? But I think equally, situation has been changing. Everyone is becoming a content creator. And likewise, if I apply that to the world of AI, I think it's a high time that we just don't think of ourselves as consumers, but also producers of, LLMs or whatever is in the background, whatever engines we are working on. Else, probably we would end up in a similar situation where products, those are built only for certain genders. Likewise, we'll end up with softwares as well, which are built for specific genders. But now coming back to your question, can we please bring up the slide? I think having a visual is much better than me just speaking. So very, very quickly, based on the research that we did, what we found out is the percentage of the gender split between men and women in general in the research world, be it the people who are writing the research or people who are reviewing it or people who are editing it, is around 70-30. So 70% men and 30% women. And if we move next, it's equally true for books as well. So it's around 29-71%. But what is mind-boggling is it's not just the in general gender split. If we move next, from the top 10 countries where this research is coming from, if you look at numbers, and they might be really very small, so I'll read it out for you. If you look at countries like Japan, right, a lot of research is coming from there. But if you look at the gender split within Japan, it is barely 11% women representing. And even with India, it is around, I think, 27%. And to be very, very honest, it is in sync with the industry standard, I must say. It's around 70-30. But industry standard doesn't mean it's correct. And that's what needs to shift, especially coming to the first question, right, where we said 43%. India has the highest number of STEM graduates in the world. That should definitely convert here, right? So that's the country-wise representation. And then if we move on, if you look at, so these are some numbers from Nature, which is the world's one of the most reputed journals. So if you see, physics is barely 10% of women, chemistry is again 10% of women. And then if we move on to the next slide, please, what you will see is a very, very jarring difference, because if you look at numbers from literature, psychology, education, linguistics, it's more than 50% of women representation. But when it comes to physics, finance, mathematics, and engineering, it's barely like 19%, 20%, and it can also go down to a single digit in some disciplines. It is as bad as that. So again, why am I talking about this? Having the data is the tip of the iceberg. It makes you aware. But never be happy just looking at data or a beautiful dashboard. What is important is you use that data for driving something, for decision making. And that's exactly what we've been doing, because these insights might be very good, but what if we don't use them? It's like having a wonderful car, but not being able to drive it, right? So if we move on, what are we doing to change, to close this gender gap is, a lot of robust trainings within and outside of the industry, especially trainings on unconscious bias, because a lot of times it does happen that you see a research from India or China and it is straight away rejected. Like this happens very, very commonly across the industry. So, robust trainings, I would say a lot of change in policy, editorial policy, systemic policies can positively influence gender diversity. These are the insights from my industry. But Pooja, do you have anything to share from your industry? And maybe since we're talking about AI, and no session is complete without talking about the ethical considerations, especially the impact it could have on social initiatives. So, what's your take on it?
Yeah. Before I get to that, I'll just extend on a few points that you made. One is one is about the large talent base in India around AI, right? And the importance of data. So when you look at, there are some of the large language models, some of the large language models and your chatbots like OpenAI, Gemini, Claude. There, what we are seeing is a lot more women users now, but in models like DeepSeek and Perplexity, where there are developer communities, there are again less women. And then Meta from Llama from Meta actually doesn't even release their data around women, and gender disaggregated data is not released there. So then we don't know what's happening there. So it's extremely important that we that data is released around it, that we ask for that, and there is accountability around it. Now, coming to just the, as India, we have the largest, we are the second largest AI talent base. I think it's about 420,000 professionals. We have the highest AI skill penetration overall. But again, when we talk to the women, 90% women will say that they see AI as a critical tool for career development, but only 35% of them feel like they have the necessary support, necessary understanding to be able to use effectively. So I think as we start to think about some of the policies around skilling, employment, that is something that is to be kept in mind. I'll just give an example where, you know, as we are thinking about ITIs and polytechnics in the country, where people are taught carpentry, plumbing, etc. kind of courses, what might make sense is to have basic AI training mandatory for everyone there. And that then ensures that the baseline training is done. And the answer to making it ungendered is thoughtful training, whether in real life or in the technology world. And there are some scientists that are already working on solutions for it, which is one of the solutions is allowing the users to feed metadata when there is a gendered sentence or there is a gendered pronoun. Or if there are gendered pronouns, then providing an alternative sentence to it, and then you can choose between them. So I think thoughtful training is a critical path solution that we have to consider.
I quite like that point, and quickly summarizing, I know we're over time. So somebody mentioned to me AI as a knife, you know. You can use it to cut vegetables or to make your life better, or you can also use it to kill someone. And since all of us have that knife in our hands, if you are trained properly, you might use it. Anyways, everyone is going to have access to it. It has also become so cheap, right? So you might as well train people on it so that they use it to save their lives and make their lives better than killing someone. On that note, do you have any parting thoughts? Do you have anything to share?
Well, it was a really fun conversation. All I will say is the theme of this conference is unbound, and therefore this is the time for women to move from being just adopters of AI to really being architects of AI. And the influence of that will not be only on gender equity, but also in how industries are being created, and also the role that India plays in the global AI economy.
Thank you. That was amazing. A quick one from me is I would say diversity is a fact, right? Nobody can change it. We can't change who we are, where we are coming from. So it's a fact. But inclusion on the other side is a choice. And it's a choice we need to make every single day, very, very consciously. And I hope all of us in this room sitting here make that choice every single day for people around us. That's pretty much from both of us. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful
you.
audience.
Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, we can't ask any questions. We are running out of time, so I request. And now we have